Nora Callahan did not cry when Silas Tanner's hand closed around her wrist at the Laramie train platform. She had stopped crying somewhere between St. Louis and the Wyoming border, in the long, rattling dark of a passenger car that smelled of coal smoke and other people's suppers, and she had made a decision in that dark that she intended to keep. So she looked at Tanner's hand on her wrist, and then she looked at his face, and she said nothing at all. That was when she heard the footsteps stop behind her. They were deliberate footsteps, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had already decided where he was going, and was not reconsidering. "Let go of her wrist," the voice said. Tanner went still. Nora did not turn around yet. She was watching Tanner's face, the way it moved through surprise, and then calculation, and then something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it, and she found that more informative than anything she might have seen if she'd turned. "Walk away, friend," Tanner said. "This ain't your concern." "I'll move when she does," the voice said. With her hand, Tanner let go, not because he wanted to. She could see that plainly in the set of his jaw. He let go because whoever was standing behind her had communicated something in those 11 words that made letting go the only reasonable option. And Tanner, whatever else he was a man who understood reasonable options. Nora turned. The man standing behind her was perhaps 38, lean through the jaw with the kind of economy that comes from years of not wasting anything, including movement. He wore a long canvas coat, the color of weathered pine, and a hat that had seen better seasons. His eyes were the particular brown of creek water in autumn. Not warm, exactly, but alive in a way that meant something was happening behind them at all times. There was no badge on his coat. There was no gun visible, though she did not make the mistake of assuming there wasn't one. He was looking at her, not at Tanner, at her. The way a person looks when they are asking a question without words, and the question is, "Are you all right? And what do you need?" "I am not going with this man willingly," she said. She said it clearly and without decoration, so that everyone on the Laramie platform who might be listening would hear it exactly once. "I am stating that plainly." Something moved across the stranger's face. Not surprise. Something quieter. "All right," he said. "Then you're not going." Tanner took a step forward. The stranger turned toward him, and the turn was so complete, so entirely without hurry, that Tanner stopped again. It was a remarkable thing to watch. The stranger had not raised his voice, and had not reached for anything. He had simply turned his full attention on Tanner Slade, the way you turn a lamp toward a dark corner, and Tanner had stopped walking. "The lady's stated her position," the stranger said. "You've heard it. Everyone on this platform has heard it. The next choice you make is going to be witnessed." Tanner looked at the platform. He looked at the conductor near the far end who had gone very still. He looked at the two women near the depot door who had also gone very still. He looked at the stranger. Then he looked at Nora with something in his pale eyes that was a promise and not a friendly one. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," the stranger said. "It isn't." Tanner walked away. His boots were loud on the platform boards, and then they weren't. Nora stood with her traveling bag in both hands, and the Wyoming wind pressing cold against the back of her neck, and she felt her heart doing something she hadn't given it permission to do, which was to slow down. She had been running it fast for 2 weeks. It had not occurred to her until this moment that it was possible to slow it down. "Ma'am." The stranger had turned back to her. Up close, his face was more weathered than she'd first assessed, with a thin scar along the left temple, the length of a thumbnail. Old. Long-heeled. "You have somewhere safe to go tonight?" Nora almost said yes. She had been saying yes to that question for 2 weeks, because saying no was the same as saying, "I am alone, and I have nothing." And she had learned in her 24 years that there were men who treated that information as an invitation. But she looked at this man's face. She looked at the directness of it, and she made a calculation. "Not precisely," she said. He nodded, as if that were a normal answer to a normal question. "There's a boarding house on the north end of Ridgeline Street, run by a woman named Hattie Doss. It's clean, and she doesn't ask questions that aren't her business." He paused. "I can walk you there if you want the company, or I can point the direction if you don't." He meant it. She could hear that. Both options were genuine. "The company," she said. They walked north on Ridgeline Street, and the town of Laramie organized itself around them. The particular rawness of a Wyoming town in October, the lumber still pale, the mud still new. The mountains beyond the edge of everything indifferent and enormous. The wind came off the snowy range, and it did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. "Callum Reed," he said, after half a block. Not an introduction so much as an offering. "Nora Callahan," she said. He said nothing further, which she appreciated. Some men filled silence the way they filled space, without consideration for whether filling it was necessary. Callum Reed walked with the silence of a man who was comfortable in it, who used it to pay attention to things that talking would prevent him from noticing. She watched him track two men on the far side of the street, without appearing to turn his head. She filed this away. "You were Pinkerton," she said. He looked at her sideways. "What makes you say that?" "The way you cataloged that platform before you took a step. The way you positioned yourself. A lawman stands still and announces himself. A gunfighter draws." She looked at the road ahead. "A detective watches first." A pause. "Used to be," he said. "What happened?" "Case I was assigned to. Man I was told to bring back was innocent. I knew it inside 2 days. My supervisor knew I knew it." He was quiet for a moment. "I brought back the evidence, instead of the man." "They let you go." "They let me go," he said. Nora absorbed this. She had met men who told stories about their past to make themselves seem interesting or to generate sympathy, and she recognized that what Callum Reed had done was neither. He had answered a question with exactly the information required to answer it, and nothing more. "Tanner sent for me through a correspondence agency," she said. She was not sure why she said it. Perhaps because he had answered plainly, and it seemed right to answer plainly in return. 6 weeks of letters. He described a telegraph operation, 40 acres along the rail corridor, a position that needed a trained operator because he was expanding his business north. She looked at the mountains. "I was the lead telegraph operator at the Jefferson City relay station for 3 years. I am very good at what I do." "I don't doubt it," Reed said. "I arrived 4 days ago. He met me at the Cheyenne platform, and the operation he described does not exist." She kept her voice level. "What exists is a small claim on a parcel of land that has value he has not explained to me, but which explains why he wanted someone on that land with a legal tie to it." She paused. "A wife's land becomes a husband's land. I understand that law very well." Reed stopped walking. She stopped too, turned to face him. His expression had not changed, but there was something in his attention that had sharpened, the specific focus of a man who has heard something important and is placing it against something he already knows. "What land?" he said. It was not a casual question. 40 acres east of Laramie, along Telegraph Creek," she said. "My father filed the deed 7 years ago. He passed 14 months ago, and it came to me." She held his gaze. "Why are you asking me that as if you already know the answer?" Reed looked at her for a long moment. The autumn sky was doing something complicated with the light behind the peaks, going gold and gray at the same time, and the wind pressed at both of them steadily. "There's a man named Cornelius Vance," he said, "land commissioner out of Cheyenne. He has been acquiring parcels along the Telegraph Creek corridor for 16 months. Legal purchase where he can manage it. Other arrangements where he can't." Nora heard the words. She placed them carefully. "The rail line," she said. "Survey was completed in August," Reed said. "The route follows Telegraph Creek from Laramie to the northern pass. Every parcel along that corridor is worth 4 times what it was worth in July." He watched her face. "Vance has been ahead of the announcement by at least a year, which means he had someone inside the survey commission. And my 40 acres, Nora said. "Is the middle third of the corridor?" Reed said quietly. "Without it, the survey route has to reroute 18 miles north, which cost the railroad enough money that they'd pay almost anything to avoid it." The cold was considerable. The mountains did not care. Nora stood on Ridgeline Street in Laramie, Wyoming, with her traveling bag and her father's deed, and the specific, clarifying anger of a woman who has understood exactly how she was meant to be used. "Tanner works for Vance," she said. "Yes," Reed said. "I've been building a case. 6 months. I have records connecting Vance to 4 fraudulent land purchases, testimony from 2 sellers who were pressured, and documentation of his arrangement with the survey commissioner." He paused. "What I cannot get is access to the telegraph records." Nora looked at him. "Vance conducted his entire operation through telegraph," Reed said. "Instructions to his attorneys, communications with the railroad, arrangements with men like Tanner. All of it sent through the Laramie relay station between January and August of this year. He met her eyes directly. Those records exist. They are held at the relay station. They are also not available to private citizens or former Pinkerton detectives without either a court order or the cooperation of someone with authorized access to the station archives. Nora was quiet for a long moment. I was the lead operator in Jefferson City, she said slowly. Before I transferred, I trained the entire regional staff on the archive system. She paused. The archive protocol is the same at every relay station in the territory. It has been standardized since 1878. Another pause. I know that system, the way most people know their own name. Reed looked at her with an expression she would spend considerable time thinking about afterward. It was not calculation, which was what she might have expected. It was something more careful than that. Something that looked like a man revising what he thought he understood about how a thing might go. You're a telegraph operator, he said. Was? She said. I imagine I still am. It's not the sort of thing you forget. And you know the archive system. I trained 37 operators in its use, she said. I can move through those records faster than anyone Vance could put in my path. The silence between them was the particular silence of two people standing at the edge of something they hadn't planned. He'll know we're looking, Reed said. Tanner will report to Vance tonight. He'll know what you just stated on that platform, which means he'll know you're not going to cooperate the way he planned, which means he'll move quickly, she said. Yes. So will we. Hattie Doss was a woman of about 60, with the compact efficiency of someone who had long ago decided that comfort was a practical matter and not a sentimental one. She opened her door, looked at Nora, looked at Reed, looked at the traveling bag, and said, Supper's in 20 minutes. Don't be late. Then she stood back. The kitchen was warm. Hattie fed them without asking questions that weren't her business, exactly as advertised, and while she moved around the stove with the brisk competence of a woman who has cooked for difficult situations before, Nora spread the 3 documents she'd been carrying against her body since Cheyenne on the kitchen table, and Reed spread 5 of his own alongside them. They worked. Reed had the systematic thoroughness of a man trained to build cases that would survive courtrooms, but he had gaps, places where the paper trail went cold because the evidence lived inside the telegraph archive and he had no way to get to it. Nora read his documentation with the speed of a woman who had spent 3 years reading information in streams, not words, the message arriving complete before the last letter printed. Your chain of causation has a break here, she said, pointing. You have Vance communicating with the railroad in January, and then the next direct evidence is April. Anything in between? Nothing I could access. The archive would have it, she said. Every message sent through a relay station is logged with sender, recipient, content, and time. There's no deletion protocol. The original paper log is kept for 7 years. She looked at him. If Vance used the Laramie station between January and April, every word he sent is still sitting in that archive room. If we can get to it, Reed said. We can get to it, she said. The night operator is a man named Percy Flood. I know Percy. We overlapped at a regional training in Denver 2 years ago. He's honest, and he's careful, and he does not like people who abuse the system he works in. She paused. I think he'd let us in. Reed looked at her across the documents. Tonight, Vance doesn't know yet what I know, she said. By morning he will. Whatever window we have is the window between now and Tanner reaching him, which is, she looked at the clock on Hattie's wall. It was 7 in the evening. Shorter than I'd like. Hattie set a coffee pot on the table without comment, which was her way of saying she was paying attention and had made a decision about whose side she was on. They went to the relay station at 9. Percy Flood was a slight man of about 35, with ink-stained fingers, and the particular alertness of someone who worked nights by choice and had built his life around the quiet intensity of that work. He opened the back door of the station, looked at Nora, looked at Reed, and said, I heard about the platform this afternoon. Word travels, Nora said. In a telegraph station, Percy said, word is the only thing that does. He stepped back. Come in. The archive room smelled of paper and cedar oil, and the specific mustiness of documents that are kept carefully rather than forgotten. Nora went to the index cabinet first, pulled the ledger for the January through August period, and began moving through it with the speed of someone reading a language they were born to. Reed stood at her shoulder. He had the intelligence not to ask questions while she was working, which she appreciated. She found the first relevant entry at 11 minutes in. January 18th, she said quietly. Sender, C. V. Land Holdings, Cheyenne. Recipient, Morrison and Hale Attorneys, Laramie. She pulled the corresponding paper log from the file drawer and read it. She read it again. He's instructing his attorney to file competing claims on 3 parcels along Telegraph Creek using backdated purchase agreements. She looked at Reed. The backdated dates he's giving are 6 months before Vance even formed the land holding company. He's claiming he bought land that didn't exist yet as a legal entity to buy it. Reed took the document carefully. He read it. Something in his face went very still. That's not a gray area, he said. No, Nora said. It's not. She was already moving to the next entry. February 2nd. Same sender. Different recipient. She pulled it. He's communicating directly with someone at the Survey Commission. He's acknowledging receipt of the route map. She looked at the date. The official survey wasn't completed until August. He had the route map in February. Reed said nothing, which was his way of saying everything. She worked for 40 minutes. The picture that assembled itself was not subtle. Vance had used the telegraph system with the confidence of a man who believed that speed made him untouchable, that by the time anyone looked at the records, the land would already be transferred, and the transfers would be facts, and facts were harder to argue than documents. He had not counted on the documents being this complete. He had not counted on the archive system being exactly what it was, a meticulous, undeletable record of everything he had said, and to whom and when. 11 messages, Nora said when she was done. She sat back and looked at what she had assembled. The copies Percy had made with the station's duplicate press were stacked in precise order, dated and indexed in her own hand. 11 messages across 7 months that connect Vance directly to the fraudulent claims, to the early acquisition of the survey route, and to explicit instructions for pressuring landowners who wouldn't sell. She looked at Reed, including a message from March that references the Callahan parcel by name and instructs Tanner to, quote, acquire the holding through matrimonial arrangement if direct purchase is refused. The room was very quiet. He put it in writing, Reed said. Men like Vance believe the system works for them, Nora said. They forget that the system is also watching. Percy Flood had been standing at the end of the room during most of this, occupying himself with tasks that kept him plausibly distant while remaining close enough to hear. Now he came to the table and looked at the assembled copies and said, I'll witness the authenticity of those copies. As the archive officer of this station, my attestation carries legal weight. Nora looked at him. You understand what that means. I understand what it means if I don't, Percy said, and his voice was steady and entirely without drama. I've been a telegraph operator for 11 years. The system I work in exists because people trust it to carry their words accurately and keep them safely. Vance used my system to commit fraud. He picked up a pen. I take that personally. He signed each copy. His signature was neat and unhurried, the signature of a man who had decided. They were back at Hattie's by 11. Nora sat at the kitchen table and made certified copies of the certified copies. Percy had taught her the duplication process in Denver, and her hands remembered it, while Reed moved through the house, checking the windows and the back entrance with the quiet economy of a man who was thinking about what came next. He'll know by morning, Reed said, coming back to the kitchen. Tanner will have reached him by now. He'll spend tonight deciding what to do. He'll try to discredit me, Nora said without looking up. Whatever I say about those archive documents can be challenged if my credibility is undermined. A woman who arrived under fraudulent circumstances, who was refused by the man who sent for her, it's not hard to build a story around that. No, Reed said, it's not. So, we don't give him the morning, she said. She set down the last copy and looked at him. Who's the federal circuit judge? Harlan Peel, Reed said. Cheyenne. He's not in Vance's pocket, I checked that first, 8 months ago. He's old-fashioned, and he's slow, but he's clean. And the U.S. Marshal? Frank Adler. I know him. He's straight, Reed paused. He's also 3 hours from Laramie by telegraph. Nora looked at the clock. It was 11:40. Percy's station is open all night, she said. A message sent now reaches Adler by midnight. If he moves in the morning, he'd be here by noon at the earliest, Reed said, which leaves us the morning without him. Then we spend the morning with witnesses, she said. He looked at her. Vance's operation worked because no one in this valley knew the full picture, she said. Each person he pressured knew their own story. They didn't know there were 10 other stories exactly like it. She straightened the stack of copies. What happens when they do know? You want to tell them. I want them to hear it from each other, she said. Hearing it from me is a woman with documents. Hearing it from their neighbors is a community understanding what was done to it. She met his eyes. Is there someone in Laramie who knows these families? Someone they trust? Reed was quiet for a moment. Reverend Ida Marsh, he said. She runs the Methodist congregation north of Maine. She's been in this valley 11 years, and there's not a family on that survey map that hasn't sat in her pews. He paused. She also has a particular and well-documented dislike of Cornelius Vance. He tried to acquire the land the church sits on in March. She declined in terms that I understand were memorable. Can we reach her tonight? She keeps long hours, Reed said. Pastoral work doesn't stop at sundown. Reverend Ida Marsh answered her door at 10 minutes past midnight, wearing a housecoat and reading glasses, and the expression of a woman who was not surprised to find urgency on her step at this hour, because urgency was frequently on her. Step at this hour. She looked at Nora. She looked at Reed. She looked at the stack of documents. Come in, she said. I'll put water on. She listened without interrupting, which was the discipline of a woman who understood that the most important thing she could do in most situations was to stop talking. When Nora finished, Ida Marsh took off her reading glasses and looked at the copies on her table and was quiet for a long moment. The Waverly family, she said. He told them the railroad had already purchased their eastern pasture and the deed transfer was a formality. They signed because they were afraid of what happened to people who argued with railroads. She paused. The Duncans. He told them there was a lien on their property dating to their original filing and that the only way to resolve it without legal fees was to accept his purchase offer. There was no lien. I know because Edmund Duncan showed me the original deed, and I spent 2 hours looking at it. She looked up. How many others? 11 properties, Nora said. All of them with the same pattern. All of them along the corridor. Ida Marsh put her glasses back on. She looked at Reed. You have the evidence. She has the evidence, Reed said. The Reverend looked at Nora with an expression that was not sentimental. It was the clear, straight look of a woman taking the measure of another woman. And what you need, she said, is for the people those 11 families know to hear this before Vance has the morning to work with. Yes, ma'am, Nora said. Ida Marsh stood up. I know where 8 of those families worship, she said. I know where most of them sleep. She was already moving toward her coat. I've been doing this 11 years. I know which back roads to take. She was out the door before Nora had finished nodding. They gathered at the church at 7 in the morning. Nora had not slept. She had spent the hours between midnight and dawn at Hattie's table checking the documents one final time, reordering them into the sequence that would be clearest to a room of people who were not lawyers, building the case, the way she'd built message chains at the relay station, so that meaning arrived complete, not piece by piece. Reed came back at 6 with word from Percy. The message to Marshal Adler had been received and acknowledged. Adler was riding for Laramie, best estimate, noon, which left them the morning. The church filled steadily between 7 and 7:30. Men and women of various ages and various degrees of visible wariness, some of them recognizing each other across the pews, with the particular look of people who have been carrying something alone and are only now understanding they have been carrying it in parallel. Nora counted 22 people before she stopped counting. She stood at the front of the room and she was aware that she was 24 years old and had been in Laramie for 4 days, and these people had no reason to trust her. She was also aware that what she was holding in her hands was the truth, which was a different kind of credential. My name is Nora Callahan, she said. I came to Laramie on a false promise arranged by Silas Tanner on behalf of a man named Cornelius Vance. The purpose was to acquire my father's deed to 40 acres along Telegraph Creek through a marriage I did not consent to. She looked at the room, not at one face, but at all of them, meeting eyes steadily and moving on. My 40 acres is the middle third of the rail corridor. Without it, the line has to reroute, and the railroad loses money they would rather not lose. She paused. I spent last night in the telegraph archive, she said. I am a trained operator, and I know that system. What I found there is 11 months of messages connecting Vance directly to every fraudulent transaction in this valley. She held up the documents. These are certified copies, attested by the archive officer of the Laramie relay station. They show the specific false claims Vance used to acquire each property. They show the instructions he gave his attorneys. They show that he had the survey route map 6 months before the official announcement and used that knowledge to target every landowner along the corridor. The room was very quiet. They also show, she said, a message from March instructing Silas Tanner to, quote, acquire the Callahan parcel through matrimonial arrangement if direct purchase is refused. She held the room's eyes. He wrote that down. He sent it through a government telegraph line because he believed no one would ever look. A man near the back said something she didn't catch, low and rough, the sound of a word that had been swallowed too long, coming back up. A woman in the third row said, he told us our deed had an error, that we'd been filing wrong for years, and the only safe thing was to transfer to his company. Her voice was entirely steady and entirely furious. We didn't know there were others. You know now, Nora said. The room came alive in the careful, controlled way of people who have been quiet for a long time and are choosing very deliberately what to do with the noise they have been holding. Not chaos, conversation. The sound of people comparing, confirming, filling in the pieces that only another person who had lived through the same thing could provide. It was in the middle of this that the church door opened. Tanner walked in with 2 men she hadn't seen before. He stopped when he saw the room. His pale eyes moved across 22 faces and the documents in Nora's hands, and Reed standing 4 feet behind her and to the left, and she watched him run the calculation and arrive at the answer. Mrs. Callahan, he said. He had adjusted his approach. She could see the adjustment happening in real time, the shift from intimidation to reason, the voice dropping into a lower, persuasive register. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Vance is prepared to discuss this matter directly. He is prepared to be very reasonable. The telegram he sent in March, Nora said clearly, uses the phrase matrimonial arrangement. That is not the language of a man preparing to be reasonable. That is the language of a man who decided what I was for before he ever wrote me a letter. She looked at Tanner without anger, because she had decided somewhere around 3 in the morning that anger was expensive and precision was free. The marshal is riding for Laramie. He'll be here by noon. The documents he needs are already in certified copy, attested, indexed, and ready for his review. Tanner looked at his 2 men. The man on the right looked at the room. He looked at 22 faces that were looking back at him. He looked at Reed, who was looking at him with the quiet, complete attention of a former Pinkerton detective who had already mapped every exit and was entirely without urgency about any of them. I ain't doing this, the man on the right said. The man on the left said nothing. He simply turned and walked back out the door, and the man on the right followed him, and Tanner turned to find he was standing alone in a church with 22 witnesses and a woman holding 11 months of his employer's correspondence. Something moved across his face. Fast. The calculation of a man whose structure has just shifted beneath him. Nora looked at him and felt something that was not quite sympathy, and not quite contempt, but that contained elements of both. He put you in every one of those messages, she said. Your name is in the archive record 17 times. Whatever Vance promised you, he was writing your name down on a piece of paper the whole time. Tanner sat down in the nearest pew. Not because he was asked. Not because anything had been offered. He sat down the way a man sits, when the shape of something he has been holding no longer fits. Reed came to stand beside Nora, not in front of her. Beside her. The marshal is straight, he said to Tanner, not unkindly. A man who comes forward voluntarily and gives specific testimony is in a different legal position than a man who is brought in. That's not a promise. That's how it works. Tanner looked at the floor. He looked at the documents in Nora's hands. He looked at Reverend Marsh, who was standing near the window with the expression of a woman who has seen most varieties of human decision and is waiting to see which kind this one is. I want to talk to the marshal, he said. Nora set a clean sheet of paper on the pew beside him and uncapped her pen. Then start talking, she said, and I'll write it down. He talked for 2 hours. Nora wrote everything. She had spent 3 years recording information that arrived faster than conversation, training her hand to keep up with her mind, and she used every part of that training now. Tanner's memory was good when he understood that his memory was the only currency he had left, and he gave it without embellishment or excuse, just the flat specific detail of a man who had kept good track of things he now wished he hadn't done. The room stayed. All 22 people. They sat in the pews and they listened, and sometimes one of them said a date or a name that matched something Tanner was describing, and the matching confirmed things that had only been suspected, and the confirming changed the quality of the room in a way that Nora felt rather than saw. The slow, collective shift of people who have been holding something alone and are finding out they haven't been alone at all. When it was done, Reverend Marsh witnessed the statement. A man named Waverly, whose family's eastern pasture was the first parcel on the fraudulent list, signed as second witness, and his hand did not shake. Marshal Frank Adler arrived at 12:40. He was a broad man in his 50s with a face that was mostly jaw, and eyes that moved constantly without appearing to, the eyes of a man who trusted deliberateness over speed, and had been proven right about that enough times to keep doing it. He shook Reed's hand with the grip of men who know each other's histories. He looked at Nora and said, "You're the telegraph operator." "I am," she said. "Percy Flood's message said you moved through 6 months of archive records in under an hour." 40 minutes, she said. Adler looked at her for a moment with the assessment of a man deciding whether to revise something. "All right," he said. "Walk me through it." She walked him through it. He read every document she indicated, asked 7 questions, and got 7 complete and specific answers. He read Tanner's sworn statement with the focused attention of a man who is distinguishing between what is useful in a courtroom and what is not, and found that most of it was. Then he stood up and said, "Where is Cornelius Vance right now?" "The Frontier Hotel," Reed said. "Room 12. Adler looked at his 2 deputies. "Let's go." Cornelius Vance was not having breakfast when they arrived. He was standing at his window looking at Main Street with the expression of a man who has understood since early morning that something has changed and has been revising his plans through the night. He was about 60, silver-haired, dressed with the careful attention of a man for whom presentation was a tool. His face, when Adler walked in, was pleasant. Entirely, deliberately pleasant. "Frank," he said, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding." "I've read the archive records," Adler said. "I've read the sworn statement. And I've read 11 months of your correspondence." He looked at Vance with the flat, patient attention of a man who has been doing this for 25 years and finds no drama in it. "On your feet, Cornelius." The pleasant face held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then it did what faces do when the shape underneath them can no longer be maintained. It settled. Not collapsed. Settled. The way ground settles after something has shifted beneath it. And in the settling, for just a moment, Nora saw the man behind the pleasant face. Tired and surprised in the particular way of people who believe they are too careful to be caught. He looked at her. "You're going to be a problem," he said. And it was not a threat. It was almost respectful. "Women like you always are." "Women like me," she said. "Read your messages and keep copies." Adler put Vance in handcuffs with the efficient quiet of a man for whom the moment of arrest was never the point. The point was everything that had built toward it. Outside on Main Street, the people of Laramie stopped and watched Cornelius Vance walk out of the Frontier Hotel with his wrists bound, and the watching had the quality of an exhale. The sound a town makes when something it has been braced against for a long time is finally, actually gone. Nora stood in the October light and felt the cold on her face, and the weight of her bag against her hip, and the particular feeling of a story arriving at the place it was always moving toward. Reed came to stand beside her. They watched Adler's party move down the street, and the crowd watched with them, and Laramie did what towns do when something changes, began the slow, necessary work of reorganizing itself around a different understanding of what was true. "It'll take months," she said. "The challenge proceedings. The criminal case." "Yes," he said. "And the families. Some of them won't want the land back, even when it's returned. They've built elsewhere." "Some will want it," Reed said. "The ones who couldn't let go." He paused. "Like you." She looked at her father's deed inside her bag, at the outline of it through the canvas. 40 acres along Telegraph Creek. Her father had said it was the kind of land that stayed when everything else moved. "What do you do now?" she said. "The case is done." Reed was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she had come to understand meant he was considering saying something he had been thinking for longer than the conversation required. "I hadn't decided," he said, "until last night." He looked at the mountains. "There's good land north of Laramie. Some of it will come available when the fraudulent transfers are unwound." He paused. "I thought I might stay, see what a man can build, given the right ground." She looked at him sidelong. That's a great deal to say for a man who doesn't waste words. I've been thinking it since the platform, he said. Figured I'd waited long enough to say it. She looked at the mountains, at the October light on the high peaks, at the town of Laramie, going about the slow work of becoming something better than it had been yesterday. She thought about 40 acres along a creek bottom and what her father had believed when he filed the deed. She thought about 11 families and what it had cost them to hold what was theirs. She thought about what it meant that a woman with a telegraph key and a trained memory had walked into a government archive and found the truth sitting there exactly where she'd known it would be, patient and complete and waiting for someone who knew how to read it. She thought about paper, the most patient weapon there is. I have opinions about land, she said, and what to build on it. I'd expect nothing less, he said. Hattie Doss appeared from somewhere the way practical women appear when things have concluded, at exactly the right moment, and from no clearly definable direction. She looked at Nora. She looked at Reed. She looked at the mountains. My dining room, she said, has a better view than this street and a great deal more coffee. The both of you look like you haven't eaten since yesterday, which I suspect is not an exaggeration. She turned and walked back toward the boarding house without looking to see if they followed, because she was a woman who had long since stopped, wondering whether people would follow when she was offering something they needed. Nora followed. Reed fell into step beside her, and behind them Reverend Marsh was crossing the street, and the man named Waverly was with her, and 2 or 3 others, the natural gathering of people who have survived something together and are finding their way toward whatever comes after surviving. The mountains stood over all of it, enormous and indifferent, the way they had stood for centuries before any of this, and would stand for centuries more. Nora Callahan had come to Wyoming 4 days ago with a traveling bag and her father's deed and a skill she had never once thought of as a weapon. She had found in those 4 days that the weapon had been there the whole time. That a woman who could read a message stream faster than most people read sentences, who understood the archive system that ran beneath every word a dishonest man sent, who knew that paper does not lie and does not frighten and does not reconsider, that woman did not need to be rescued. She needed someone willing to stand in the same cold. And on a platform in Laramie, Wyoming, in the first week of October, with the snowy range behind her and her wrists still warm where a stranger had made a man let go, she had found exactly that. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you carry isn't a weapon or a deed, it's the skill you've spent years quietly building, the one you stopped thinking of as remarkable because it came so naturally. Nora didn't wait to be rescued. She walked into the dark with what she knew, and that was enough. Whatever you've learned, whatever you're good at, don't underestimate it. That quiet competence might be exactly what someone, someday, is counting on you to use. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you an entertaining journey through the old American West, while leaving behind a little something worth carrying, a reminder that the right person, in the right moment, can change everything simply by showing up and knowing their worth.